This is the Memory Palace. I'm Nate DiMeo. When Lake Okeechobee flooded its banks in 1926, and the levee that the people who lived there, people who had moved there to build South Florida, to turn it from a pestilent swampland into a developer's idea of paradise. The levee that those people had made with their hands out of muck and rocks and marsh grass to protect the homes they'd built by the water. When that levee collapsed, as it was bound to do one day, though they hadn't lived enough days in South Florida to know it, and the water rose so high and the water rose so fast that they drowned 300 of those people by the lake, because they didn't know that sometimes the rain just doesn't stop there. And the people who lived in the bungalows in Miami Beach, the people who had traveled on the East Florida Railway, that impossible thing that had been dreamed up by oil men and hotel magnates, and made possible by other men who had macheted mangrove forests and drained swamps and filled land and laid tracks and lost their lives, many. The people who'd been lured southward by the vision of paradise described in newspaper ads and real estate brochures and arrived to find that it was all true. The skies were that blue. The clouds, the sand were that white. And the ocean was streaked copper and silver and something like platinum, but more pink somehow by the sun. And this green blue that no copywriter could ever quite capture. And they bought their own piece of that paradise and made their new home in a new city where 150,000 people lived, where 50,000 people had lived 5 years before, where 50 people had lived 20 years before. A city where it never grew cold, and the flowers bloomed all year, and the freshly planted trees by the beach along the boulevard never lost their leaves, and would sway in the breeze in this green and white and blue place they now got to live. Those people didn't have radar to tell them that the clouds in the horizon were a hurricane, that those clouds went back hundreds of miles, lined up like invading battalions on the march. The paper that morning told them that a storm that had recently troubled the Bahamas wasn't coming for Florida at all. The paper, just a few weeks before, declared that Miami needn't worry about hurricanes. The paper of record in a city so new that no one had been living there long enough to remember what a real hurricane could do. That paper promised that a walk across the tree-lined boulevard to get a rum and soda at one of the new deco hotels in the Strip was far more dangerous than any storm could ever be there. But then this storm came so fast, came with no name and no category, came before meteorologists could come up with the ideas to name and categorize hurricanes, before satellites could be invented and launched, before building codes could be adjusted, before wind-whipped reporters could talk wind speed and eye-wall regeneration and cones of uncertainty, while swirling animations traced possible trajectories across flat screens in sports bars and assisted living facilities, before the people in Miami in 1926 could get out of the way. And so the roofs of their new homes in paradise were torn open, and the heavens poured in, and the walls split and splintered, and the ocean overtook their living rooms, chased down their cars as they tried to outrun the sea, and the boats in the bay came to shore, capsized and crashing into the trees with no leaves now along the boulevard, and hotel lobbies, bakery windows. Some people, 50, more, were swept into the water, now gray and white and roiling, and weren't seen again. And when suddenly the winds died down and the clouds parted, and some people were sure this was the miracle they'd just been shouting for into the roar minutes before, stepped out into the streets and hugged their families, or kissed the ground, or fell to their knees in prayer or relief, and they had never heard of a hurricane's eye, and didn't know there was more to come. And they were trapped outside, as the outside itself seemed to come for them. Branches and sand, and shingles and boards and street signs, airborne and angry. Meteorologists and historians of the region would reconstruct the hurricane over the years, piece together data points, inometer and barometer readings from Nassau and San Juan and Miami, rainfall in St. Augustine, storm surge in Pensacola, anecdotal accounts in local papers, and the diaries of survivors. And they would map its destructive path and tally its costs and estimate its dead and place the storm in a historical chain of Atlantic hurricanes and retrofit this one with contemporary terms: a classic Cape Verdean cyclone, a Category 4 on the Saffir-Simpson scale, though they wouldn't give it a name beyond the Great Miami Hurricane of 1926. And city planners and engineers and builders and insurance companies and state and local interagency working groups would incorporate that information into their models and risk assessments and the recommendations and regulations as part of their ongoing efforts to make a paradise where maybe one shouldn't be, and to protect future Floridians trying to live there. But the Floridians who lived there in 1926, who lived through that storm that came so fast, that came without warning, they were left to reconstruct their homes and take seeds from the fallen trees and plant new trees that are always green and flowers that always bloom, and reconstruct their lives when they had lost so much and gained no more than the knowledge that sometimes the rain just doesn't stop. This episode of The Memory Palace is written and produced by me, Nate DiMeo, with engineering assistance from Elizabeth Aubert. This show is a proud member of Radiotopia from PRX. We receive ad-serving technology from Adzerk. Our ad music is composed and performed by J.D. Sampson. From time to time, I like to take the time to tell you about the other shows here in the Radiotopia family. This time it is a new one, Trump Con Law, a new project from Roman Mars of 99% Invisible, where each episode he sits down with constitutional law professor Elizabeth Jo, a remarkably smooth and natural radio host, not just for a law professor, but for anyone really. And they look at constitutional law through the particular and peculiar lens of the Trump administration. It is fascinating, it is for real fun. And you can find Trump Con Law and all the other Radiotopia shows at radiotopia.fm. And you can find me at thememorypalace.org and on Facebook and Twitter at The Memory Palace. Talk to you guys again.
Radiotopia.